Return to who you are, the kind, loving person that you are. Stephen Cope, author of a book titled The Great Work of Your Life, wrote, "There is no greater champion of Dharma in American letters than Unitarian Henry David Thoreau. He is one of the few who actually used the word Dharma in his writing and in his thought. Thoreau was an American poet, naturalist, surveyor, philosopher, and a leading transcendentalist. If any of you know the history of Unitarian Universalism, you know there were many transcendentalists in our history. Thoreau was one of them, Margaret Fuller another, as was Ralph Waldo Emerson. When Thoreau, so just to jog your memory, transcendentalism, as defined by Wikipedia, which is actually pretty good these days, that was a 19th century movement of writers and philosophers in New England who were loosely bound together by adherence to an idealistic system of thought based on a belief in the essential unity of creation, the innate goodness of humanity, and the supremacy of insight over logic and experience for the revelation of the deepest truths. When Thoreau sat by Walden Pond day after day for nearly 2 years, the book he brought with him for study was the Bhagavad Gita. He and his mentor, also a Unitarian, Ralph Waldo Emerson, often quoted the majestic 1785 translation of the Gita by Charles Wilkins. The Bhagavad Gita is one of the most important texts that emerged from Hinduism. While absorbed in meditation, Thoreau wrote, quote, "Depend on it, that rude and careless as I am, I would fain practice the yoga faithfully." A footnote here for some of you who may not be aware, yoga, as most contemporary people understand, emerged out of Hinduism. The system of finding balance in word and thought and action, word, thought, and action, has deep roots in Hinduism. That is, ancient sources say maybe Hinduism rose 6th century, 6 to 10,000 years ago. And yet the practice of yoga, set aside from the practice of Hinduism, arose anywhere 500 to 1500 before the Common Era. So back to the Bhagavad Gita, which any of you who have yoga training know probably were asked as part of that training to read the Bhagavad Gita. In its original form, this lovely text from the 5th to maybe the 2nd century before the Common Era, even here the truth of the text when that emerged remains unclear. The Bhagavad Gita also means the song of the Blessed One. It was an independent poem that was later inserted into its present context. It is this book 6 of the Mahabharata, India's most cherished national heroic tale. It is a text, a teaching that pertains to the search for one's sacred duty. So let me tell you the context of where this epic tale came. The kingdom of Kuru has been ripped apart by now generations-old conflict between two different but closely related lines of the royal family. They are cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. The Pandavas are Arjunas. Arjuna is the main character in the story, Arjuna. The Pandavas are Arjuna's family, and they have come to be known as the forces of light. The forces of darkness were the Kauravas. They have illegally usurped the throne of Kuru and destroyed the peace and well-being of the people. Arjuna, observing all of this, is loath to become part of the pernicious disorder infecting the kingdom. So picture this, Arjuna, the warrior, is huddled in the chariot and says to the chariot driver, with words that seem inconsistent, your teaching has bewildered my mind. Tell me, what must I do to arrive at the highest good? So as I said, there are two main characters in the story. There's Krishna, the chariot driver, and there's Arjuna, the warrior. So who do Krishna and Arjuna represent? Arjuna, a clan warrior and hero, represents the beginning student, young and old alike. We are all students, new to a spiritual practice, perhaps. Krishna, the character who is a chariot driver, represents God, the source of all being. I've often said what the observer, this is the one who observes humans and their behavior. What might the battle represent? Because if you read the Bhagavad Gita, it is all about war and battle, but it's not really. Arjuna, clan warrior and hero, represents the beginning student. Krishna, the character who is a chariot driver, again, is the source of all being. So what might that battle represent? It's the battle for authenticity. How many times have you asked yourself, what is the right thing to do? The life and the death of the soul, perhaps. It's not a literal battle. It is about, one, a person's struggle against hate, greed, ignorance, and ingrained selfishness. It is about reaching a state of mind, body, and spirit that allows all things to come and go without effort and without desire for any foreseen result. So I've mentioned some terms already, so let me just review. Dharma means one's duty or one's calling. Dharma has also implied teachings about one's duty or one's calling or one's purpose. Karma is action, embarking on a spiritual practice, abandoning all desires, and performing in an action that is for the greater good. Yoga means to yoke, to bring together, that is to combine. So there are 6 paths of yoga, but in the Gita, only 3 paths. 4 if you count bhakti yoga, which is worship. So the 3 include karma yoga, path of action, jnana yoga, path of knowledge or wisdom, and Raja Yoga, the path of meditation. So those 3 areas, karma, jnana, yoga, action, wisdom, meditation. This is the first one, karma, in the Gita. The superior man is he whose mind, and I'm going to go with non-specific pronouns. The superior person is the person whose mind can control their senses with no attachment to results. The person engages in yoga of action. Here's a piece from the Gita. Without concern for results, perform the necessary action, surrendering all attachments, accomplish life's highest good. We do our actions because it's the right thing to do. Jnana Yoga is the path of knowledge gained through devotion to study and learning. This learning leans in the direction of Bhakti Yoga, which includes a connection with the divine, seer, observer. These 2 ideas are supported in this passage. A connection is what I keep in mind. However people try to reach me, I return their love with my love. This is chapter 4, Scripture 11. Whatever path they may travel, it leads to me in the end. So returning for a moment to Henry David Thoreau, in his study of the Gita, he wrote, "A person tracks themselves through life. One should always be on the trail of one's own deepest nature. For it is the fearless living out of your own essential nature that connects you to the divine. Of course, Thoreau was a theist, and we know some in this room are not theists, some are. But you'll hear more in a minute when I explain how I think we still make a connection before exploring the last yoga concept in the Gita. Let's look at how the divine is described in the Gita. I don't think many atheists, Christian, Jewish, or other could argue with the merit of this following text. Krishna says, chapter 7:4, Krishna says, earth, fire, wind, water, air, mind, understanding, and the eye, sense. These are the 8 aspects of my physical nature. Chapter 7:8, I am the taste in water, the light in the moon and the sun, the sacred syllable Om. In the Vedas, the sound of air. Beautiful. Finally, throughout the text, the Raja Yoga, the classical practice of meditation and calmed reflection, is highlighted. It is represented well here. Chapter 5:28, closing one's eyes, one's vision focused between the eyebrows, making the in-breath and the out-breath equal as they pass through one's nostrils. One controls one's senses and one's mind. So we have the basis for understanding the Gita, which is a way of learning about how to be as a human. It's a metaphor. The Bhagavad Gita is a metaphor. It's not the divine's affirmations of the merits of real war. Well, then what does the battle represent, you said? Well, as I said, it's about a battle for authenticity. In Unitarian Universalist circles, that's what we're all struggling for. How can I be authentic to myself and support all others? Will one give in to greed, hate, ignorance, and ingrained selfishness? Or will one reach toward a state of mind that allows all things to come without effort, without a desire to control an outcome? The Gita is a representation for how to live your life, to fight for authenticity, to recognize that forces of kind, helpful acts of love and service reside within ourselves. But so do forces of greed, hatred, ignorance, and doubt. We've all been there. Even now, you know, the quandary of what to do in any given situation and then getting stuck there in a cycle of suffering. The war Arjuna encounters is doubt, not the kind that has to do with not sure what to do, although that is definitely present in this series of texts, but it focuses more on the kind that prompts one to get stuck, to not be able to move, to change, to evolve in the direction that one needs to move in order to live humbly without having attachment to outcomes. The story begins with Arjuna not praising Krishna, the chariot driver, notice, but who is the warrior huddled in the chariot, in the floor of the wagon, while both armies are facing one another. Arjuna is looking in the faces of his relatives over here. Both sides of the relatives are getting ready to fight one another. Arjuna is experiencing a crisis of a heart and mind, unable to move, to function, to engage with the outer world. Arjuna is consumed with doubt. Doubt, as understood here, so says Cope, really means stuck, not skeptical. Doubt in this tradition is sometimes defined as a thought that touches both sides of a dilemma at the same time. To ease away from the paralyzing thought process is to focus on one's duty, that is, one's gift, one's talent. It is to act with one's heart and to let go of the attachment to the result of that action. Chapter 2:49. Those who are motivated only by desire for the fruits of action are miserable, for they are constantly anxious about the results of what they do. This teaching encourages the student of life, and we are all students, to stop grasping for an outcome. Aspiring for a goal is not a bad thing, but suffering because it is not attained should not be one's focus. Doing one's dharma, one's duty, offering one's gift of self, this is the focus. Cope said this teasing apart is the very heart of the genius of the Bhagavad Gita. The authors of the Gita presented an entirely new strategy. The practitioner can, in fact, tease grasping apart from aspiration by harnessing desire to the Dharma. Grasping causes suffering. Aspiration is fine, but one must let go of the outcome and focus on one's duty, one's calling, one's purpose in the world, and let go of the result. It is about obtaining quiet, life-giving wisdom, to heed the impulse to work for justice, but to know, so that impulse to work for justice, we do this because it's the right thing to do. But we know that the result may not be achieved in our lifetime. Maybe it will, or maybe it won't, but the suffering occurs when we're constantly churning about the future. What I'm doing today, this is going to make a result. This is going to make a result. I'm talking to you now because it's really hard, isn't it, with elections coming up? It's just a few days away, and the tension is sky high. I feel it. The storms added to this tension. May you hear me today. We do what we can because it is the right thing. It is the authentic thing that we do. And then we pause to stay calm. Whatever happens in the unknown future, we do what we need to do, what needs to be done, and remain calm. Here's another piece in the Gita. As fire is obscured by smoke, as a mirror is covered in dust, as a fetus is wrapped in its membrane, so wisdom is obscured by desire. So I want to pause briefly for a story about Walt Whitman, the writer with whom Emerson and Thoreau both admired. Whitman wrote, God to Whitman was both immanent and transcendent, and the human soul was immortal and in a state of progressive, constant development. This was Whitman's idea of God. Whitman's writings exemplifies the idea that wisdom can be obscured by desire. It pertains to listening to the call for one's gift and matching it to what the world needs at that moment. Whitman, the author of Leaves of Grass, was also an advocate for the teachings located in the Gita. He was familiar. Even though Whitman was a poet, essayist, philosopher, and patriot, Whitman finally found what he believed was his truest calling. It wasn't to become a great essayist writer, as he once thought. It was to become a volunteer nurse in the Civil War. Remember, one thread in the Gita is the notion that each person becomes a warrior, a fighter who counters thoughts of uselessness with a search for how to use one's gifts and offer them to humanity when humanity needs it most. Krishna in the Gita said, whenever righteousness falters and chaos threatens to prevail, I take on a human body and manifest myself on earth. Reading further, Krishna said, in every age I am born. Now, this is a beautiful story, not based on any historical fact, a beautiful story. Whitman's career as a poet had burst into the consciousness of citizens in this nation in 1855. Leaves of Grass was what propelled him into the limelight. However, he received so much pushback for the verses that alluded to the physical body and to that forbidden topic known as Sex. Here are the opening lines. I celebrate myself and seeing myself, and what I assume, you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. He might be singing a me, but his last line attests to the we aspect of humankind. These beautiful words reflect a keen awareness of the connectedness of humanity. However, after the public outcry raging against his words, suggestive and far too sexual for the times, Walt Whitman found himself in a deep well of depression 5 years later. And then the Civil War broke out, and Whitman watched as one cousin from the Union Army fought another cousin from the Confederate Army. Where do we find the same theme of kin against kin, cousin against cousin? I dare say neighbor against neighbor. Sound familiar? Arjuna in the Gita, perhaps? The question of how one person can kill another when the two are from the same family is timeless and universal. Again, due to election troubles, I know within people's families there has been hurt from one another, hurt in our neighbors. So look at how long ago this is. Between 1862 through the end of the war, Whitman visited. He found his dharma, his true purpose. He visited wounded soldiers who were in the hospital. He brought them candy, fruit, cigarettes, writing paper. Mostly he brought himself to their bedsides and listened to the stories of their lives, their sorrows, and their yearnings for loved ones. Imagine the mere act of listening can be one's dharma, one's duty, one's purpose. Stephen Cope says, history shows us why it is that we cannot look at the gift, our talent, for its own sake. The gift cannot reach maturity until it is used in the service of a greater good. In order to ignite the full ardency of dharma, the gift must be put into the service of the times. Cope's statement implies that we must look at what we have to offer now, not what we used to do or used to have as a gift, but ascertaining what we have today to offer in service of the greater good. Consider this, 100 years before the merger of Unitarians and Universalists in 1961, 100 plus years, our Unitarian ancestors were living examples of that free and responsible search for truth and meaning that we're doing today. That value of pluralism, knowing that in any of our gathering places, one person may have a differing personal spiritual belief than another, but we believe that we all belong together based on our love of our values. So they opened a treasure box when they opened the Bhagavad Gita, a book of teachings from the East, and they got answers and, of course, more questions that span the generations of all cultures and all people. Who am I? How am I to be as I move through this garden of both poison and pleasure in this life that is filled with glories, fears, and terrors? We cannot end our exploration of the Gita without speaking briefly about this one part of chapter 11. This too speaks to the human need to know what cannot be fully known. Listen to this. Arjuna pushes Krishna to reveal Krishna's face. Arjuna says, I want to see for myself the splendor of your ultimate form. Krishna responds by saying, look, Arjuna, literally meaning look. And Krishna takes this form, a billion arms flailing, the sun for his eye, the moon for his other eyeballs that are sticking out, flames out of the mouth. Arjuna responds by saying, my innards tremble. My breath stops. My bones turn to jelly. Arjuna becomes very afraid and says, have mercy on me. So be careful what we wish for. The Gita is a love song to both the darkness and the light, to one's own true self and the depths of being, the core from which all the glories and the horrors of the universe unfold. It is through humble discernment, quiet contemplation, a commitment to one's dharma, one's willingness to be of service in some form or other. This is what is of importance. It is about giving of time, maybe talent or treasure, as the old cliche goes, and hoping for positive outcomes, but not succumbing to the fatal grasp of an unknown future where you are stuck in a spiral of suffering. May it be. Thank you for sitting in this warm room and listening. May it be so.